What's up, guys? It's three-time NFL Pro Bowler, all-decade return specialist, Josh Cribbs. I want to welcome you to the College Sports Connection podcast, where Double A, Alex, and AJ host the Mid-American Conference Best.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the CSC podcast. All action, all the time. I'm your host, Alex the Captain. Joining me, as always, it's AJ the Guru.
What's going on, everybody?
AJ, welcome back. Big hats off and a congrats to Bowling Green women's basketball, who are now in the Fab Four of the WNIT tournament. They knocked off Florida in pretty dominating fashion Monday night at the Stroh Center. Near capacity crowd from everything I'm understanding. It's their third largest turnout for a game at the Stroh Center. So that was really exciting for them. Florida came in and kind of punched them in the mouth early, took a 3-point lead at the break, but then the Falcons outscored them by 20, 41-21 in the second half, and just ran away with that game to send themselves back to the Fab Four of the WNIT, where they will take on Columbia on Wednesday night. Probably you guys will be hearing this recording after that game takes place, but they take them on Wednesday night at the Stroh Center, and tickets are sold out.
Are they really?
So standing room tickets only, from what I understand. So that's hats off to them carrying the banner for the Mid-American Conference. And I think for them, you couldn't ask for much better of a season, depending on how things play out, of course. But this, for not making the women's NCAA tournament, I think having a great run in the WNIT is all you could really ask for at this point.
No, without a doubt. I mean, they're 31-6 on the year.
That ties a program record dating back to 2007.
Absolutely. You look at it here, Liberty round one, beat Green Bay round two, beat Memphis, which I thought the Memphis game was going to be a lot closer than what it ended up being. It ended up being a 13-point win for the Falcons, and then beating Florida by 17 points.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely dominated Florida in that second half.
They really did. It was fantastic. Great job for the Falcons. As we've talked about it before, great for the Mid-American Conference getting some of these ESPN games as the game tomorrow at 4 o'clock, my time, should say, on ESPN3. And so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, no, I really like what Robin Freilich has done down there. Mm-hmm. She was brought in to try to win a championship. And, well, I mean, they're 2 wins away from a WNIT championship, which is pretty good. I know people talk about it being the not in tournament invitational, but I think you could very easily make a case for the top 4 teams of the NIT or the WNIT being, well, NCAA tournament teams. So sure. Hats off to them and the season that they've had so far. They're going for a program record breaking 30-second win on Wednesday. We'll have the recap on that next week after that game takes place. But this week, we kind of wanted to dial it back a little bit. There's been a lot of debate going on online. AJ, I know I shared this prompt with you, but there's been a lot of debate going on online about teams and how they define a successful year. So we took to Twitter, posted this tweet earlier this week. It says, I know various fans from MAC programs will kind of measure success differently for their programs, basketball, football, baseball, whatever. So we asked, what do you as a fan define as a successful year for your various and favorite sports team?
Mm-hmm.
We got a lot of responses here, which I was pretty pumped about. A lot of people from a bunch of different programs kind of chiming in and throwing out ideas from Northern Illinois, Buffalo, all the Ohio schools, a couple of the Michigan schools. So before we get into the responses, AJ, what's your take? Well, how do you define a successful season? I know that you grew up, well, not grew up, but that you went to Ball State. What are your expectations? Obviously, I think the goals and defining a season as successful are 2 very different things. So I think we need to get that out of the way.
Sure. I'll start with basketball first. You look at Indiana, you look at the tradition of high school basketball in the state of Indiana, and yes, you have to battle with the IUs, the Purdue's, the Butlers, even Indiana State times for recruiting, the Notre Dames. But still, there's so much great talent within the state. I think when you look for a successful season in basketball, and now that Ball State finally has that and Coach Michael Lewis, the successful season is it being in contention for the MAC championship at the end of the year, which is
Hmm.
something someplace they haven't been in a long time. I mean, in my 4 years in Muncie, that just wasn't the case.
Hmm.
So you look at you hire a coach like Coach Lewis, who's from Indiana. He gets it. He gets Indiana high school basketball. He understands how important it is to recruit the state of Indiana. And I think as he gets deeper, he's lost a few guys to the transfer portal this year. Peyton Sparks in particular, that's a huge hit to the
Yeah.
program. But I think as he gets his feet a little more deeper, a little more wetter in recruiting and coaching, he will be able to recruit the state of Indiana extremely hard. And I think with that brings a lot of success because where Muncie is just an hour or so south is Newcastle, Indiana, which has one of the biggest high school basketball arenas in the country
Yep.
and is home to the Indiana High School Basketball Hall of Fame, all that great stuff. So I think where they're located, expectations are going to be high as Coach Lewis proceeds to go into his career. But like I mentioned, now that we have a coach who gets it, the expectations should be contending for a MAC championship every year, and because they're going to have the ability to do it. On the flip side, on football wise, I've been lucky enough to have seen a MAC championship, in Detroit a couple of years ago when nobody else did. The
Hmm.
stadium was empty. We were one of the few in there, which was great. Um, and you look at that, and the Cards have taken a little bit of a dip since then. Obviously, lost a ton of great players, whether graduation, NFL, things of that nature. Um, but I think this year's a good idea or it's a good year for Coach New because he's gonna have a fresh start at quarterback. Drew Plitt, he's moved on to the XFL,
Hmm.
playing with the Houston Rough Riders or Rough Riders, whatever they're called.
Roughnecks, I think. Yeah.
Roughnecks, yeah. He was the starting quarterback down there. So there's I think a three-way battle at quarterback this year. And I
Hmm.
think with Coach New being a former quarterback himself at Ball State, coaching guys like Drew Brees in the National Football League down in New Orleans, I think the expectation this year in particular is to get back to Detroit. We're only a couple of years removed from it.
Sure.
Um, and I think one of the things, if it's a week by week thing, I think is one of those things where not to get blown out on a Wednesday, on a Tuesday or Wednesday.
So I
We've
guess let me kind of rephrase the question because I think a couple people online as well kind of I think some of the direction was unclear. For example, I'll just pick on Akron for a minute. They're happy with a 6-win season in football. However, their basketball expectations and what they deem a successful season in basketball are winning a MAC championship.
Mhm.
In football, I think what, we're happy that we didn't finish below 500. I
Sure.
think that's what they're happy with because it's all about building blocks. And this was a point that BG Football Talk, Bowling Green Football Talk brought up um, on one of the threads here, and he talked about how each team has the same goals. And yes, every team wants to win a MAC championship. Every team wants to win their bowl game. You know, possibly even get ranked in the top 25. That goal is not different for any program. But I
Right.
do think that, and Dan Savage made this point. Our goal is not go to a bowl, and he's a Toledo fan. He said our goal is not to go to a bowl like Akron's will be. Our goal is to get a good bowl and win.
Mhm.
And Bowling Green Football Talk countered with your goal is more success than Akron, but going to a bowl and winning a bowl are very similar. In the SEC, Vandy and Alabama have different goals. It's the same thing in the Mid American Conference. And this is where I disagree with him. He says no one in the MAC has that large of a difference in their goals. But I disagree.
Mhm.
You look at Toledo, the fans are unhappy if Toledo isn't in Detroit.
Mhm.
Akron fans are unhappy if they go 0-12. Akron fans are happy if you go 5-7 because
Mhm.
it's positive momentum in the right direction.
Right.
Toledo fans, you even saw it online. Toledo fans weren't happy that we were in Detroit at 7-5.
Yeah, they
That
were
that
happy
was
that,
to them, a lot of fans, a disappointing season,
yeah, and they
finishing
were
9-5 with a bowl win and a MAC championship.
and with Coach Hano getting an extension,
Yeah.
like they just didn't like it. I don't know why.
Yeah. So it's the expectations, so even for some fans, winning a MAC championship is not enough
Mhm.
because Toledo didn't do one thing. They didn't beat
Right.
their rival.
And we've talked about that a lot too with like Western Michigan, for example.
Hmm.
Coach Lester, good friend of ours, he was let go and he saw all these fans, glad about it, which you and I were heartbroken
Hmm.
about it. And he had one losing season in 6 years. He won what, 2-1 in bowl games. He,
1-2 in bowl games.
1-2. And we happened to be at that bowl game in Detroit. But like they got so spoiled with PJ Fleck the
Hmm.
years prior, going to the Cotton Bowl and playing Wisconsin and doing all this stuff that they just assumed, oh, this is how things are going to be going forward. Well, that's just simply not the case. That's not how it works in the Mid-American Conference.
It's not how
You
it
know,
works in the MAC. And it's frustrating, right? Because the MAC and a lot of other Group of Five conferences, they're more often than not they're used as a stepping stone
yeah.
for Power Five jobs,
Hmm.
which, like it or not, that's how it's been for its whole history. You look all the way back to the 50s and 60s. Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler, Ara Parsagian, all those guys coached at MAC schools, coached at Miami,
Yeah.
and then went on to coach at Northwestern, Michigan, Ohio State, you know,
Yeah.
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
Lou
Yeah.
Holtz coached in the Mid American Conference, I believe, briefly.
Yep.
You've got Nick
He went,
Saban,
he
you've
went to
got
Kent
Gary
State. Yeah.
Pinkel, you've
Nick
got
Saban. You got
yeah, you've
who else?
got um, what's his name?
Brian Kelly coached at
Yeah, Brian Kelly coached at
Central
Central
Michigan.
Michigan, then went to Cincinnati, then went on to Notre Dame. You've got Urban Meyer coached at Bowling Green. So just that expectation that you're going to sustain that level of success is a great expectation. I'm,
Hmm.
you know, I support it, frankly. However, the goal is, how much different is your fandom happy if you win a MAC championship versus if you win 6 games? And I think it's different for every single program. You look at, we'll just use Toledo as this year's sample size. The Toledo men's basketball team won 3 straight outright conference regular season championships.
Hmm.
No NCAA tournament bids. Nobody's talking about the fact that they won 3 straight regular season titles. Everybody's saying, oh, they're now on year 44 of not going to the NCAA tournament, which,
Right.
fair or not, that's the criticism. That's the expectation now. It's been this long. We need to end this drought. We're
Hmm.
we're we're good enough. We're clearly good enough. We need to end this drought. Toledo
Sure.
women's basketball, same thing. They're back. They went back to the tournament this year. Whereas, you know, Ball State, for their men this year, they were happy to. It's based off of everything I was seeing. They were just happy that they were back in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
those expectations are so much different as fans. And I think as a Ball State fan, those fans would define this year as a successful season. Would you or would you
Extremely,
not agree?
extremely. Because if you look at the past 4 years with Coach Witt, it just wasn't successful. It wasn't fun to watch, and it's fun to watch when the men and women are both successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, kind of going off expectations here, and I think one thing it never really entered my mind until now, it's the expectation of keeping players at the school with the transfer portal now
Yep.
and NIL. And the Mid-American Conference is in a tough spot because they're going to get kids, but they're going to lose a lot of kids too. It's just how it's going to work, unfortunately. But the expectation of, all right, like keeping a guy like Carson Steele in Muncie, he was going to use, when Muncie he was the big fish in a little pond. Now he's at UCLA, these with some 4 and 5 star guys. It's a
Mm-hmm.
whole different. I'm not saying he can't play with them because he absolutely can, but it's an entirely different level of competition. So, the expectation being trying to keep players at schools for more than 2 years. I think if you can keep them there for 3 years, that's a success. I think at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think as I'm kind of thumbing through these responses a little bit more, it's it's very, very interesting. We've got Ball State guy commented for Ball State basketball, I'd like at least a MAC championship berth, and that
Mhm.
they would deem that a successful season. For a lot of the Toledo fans I'm seeing comment here, winning record out of conference, win a bowl game, trip to the MAC championship, One of them says at least 8 wins in football and a win against Bowling Green. And this guy even went on to say, even with the MAC championship last season, it's hard to call it a success with only 7 regular season wins. A very embarrassing loss at home to Bowling Green.
Can't
An
please
Eastern.
everybody, I guess.
I'm sorry.
You just can't please everybody.
No, I mean the goal what is always to what? That's the number one goal, beat your rival, right?
Yeah.
That is one thing Toledo did fail at this year.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, that's what they failed at. I did see one in here from an Eastern Michigan fan. For them to call it a successful year, 8 wins, ideally a conference title or at least a division title and a bowl win. Well, Eastern Michigan split the West Division title, lost the headbreaker to Toledo, so Toledo went to the MAC championship, but they got the bowl win. And they finished the year with 9 wins overall. So I think that expectation is up there.
There was one you brought up a little bit ago that I didn't even think about, and that is the non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
If you go over and non-conference and you go into the MAC play, 0-3, 0-4, that's not a great start. So if
Mhm.
you can at least split your non-conference games or come out with at least one or at least one win, that's a huge success, I think, as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair one as well. Another one, and this is just where expectations are as fans. Kent State football, six wins to be bowl eligible. They would deem that a success. Kent State basketball, 20 plus wins, and win the MAC tournament. NIU football, minimum first or second in the MAC West, winning record, get to a bowl game. Basketball, just get better every season. Just want to see progress. So those are where those expectations are. Football. An Akron fan commented, baseline measure, beat Kent State. That's the minimum across the board, every sport. For basketball, finish in the top 3 in the MAC and a finals appearance at least. So this year would have been considered a failure to this fan since they didn't appear in the finals. Football, 6-6. Men's soccer, deep tournament run. Soccer's had a history of doing really well. They've won a national championship back in 2010. So 6-6 feels like a good, hey, we can be happy with this. And that was that bar I was talking about for Akron in football. But there's just so many different responses here that I think it's a fair thing to consider. Every program has different expectations per the fans. The program themselves all have the same goal. Get to Detroit, win the MAC championship, win a bowl game. Beat your rival. Those are the same goals for every single program. I could probably right now walk into every single locker room and they would have something posted, season goals. I'm sure at, Miami, season goals, beat Ohio, win the MAC East, win the bowl game, whatever. Toledo, beat BG, it's going to be the same thing all in every single one of those locker rooms.
Yeah.
So the fan expectations and the fan, how you define it as a successful season are very different. I think Bowling Green last year, your hope is to win the MAC. I mean, you dominated in the 2010s with Northern Illinois. You won 2 titles. You were in, I think, 4 title games in the Mid-American Conference in the 2010s. But this year, you have to consider this year better than expected. You beat Toledo, something you haven't done in a couple years, something you've actually only done once in the last 11 years. You went to a bowl game. You didn't win your bowl game, but you went to a bowl game, and you were really a win away from making the MAC championship game. So preseason predictions had Bowling Green finishing 3-9, 4-8. They finished 6-7 with a 5-point bowl game loss. So I think they, if I were a Bowling Green fan, hey, that was a successful football season for us based off of where they're at the time. And that's the other part of it. Like a few years ago, Eastern Michigan was the worst football team in the country. Now their fans are expecting 8 wins.
Yeah.
A few years ago, you could expect them to, hey, let's get to 4 wins. Let's get to 5 wins. So yes, those expectations as fans and what you deem successful changes. But I think it's always interesting to kind of have that discussion.
Yeah, it really is. And those expectations are going to change. from the fan yearly. Like you look at Akron, Coach Moorhead comes in. They had high expectations for him, coming in, but they also knew where they were at. Now that he's in year two, I think their expectations are going to be much higher. You saw with OU
Hmm.
when Coach what's his name at OU?
Bowles,
No,
the
no,
football coach.
football. Yeah,
Oh, Solich. It's he just signed an extension. Why am I
yeah.
blanking on
Why do
this?
we know? Anyways, he came in having been in the program, taking over the coach in his first year was
Tim
not
Albin.
good. Tim Albin, that's it. And his first year was a big struggle, but they were able to turn it around this past season and get 8 or 9 wins, however many it was.
Yeah.
So I think now OU's expectations have changed from his first year to his second year, now going into his third year.
Hmm.
And now he's got that extension. People are going to want to see results, and I think OU will be just fine in that department because they always find a way to get those results.
Yep.
But I think their expectations are going to change too. Everybody's is going to.
Well, and as they should, right?
Right.
You adjust. Like Toledo fans, for example, hadn't been to a MAC championship prior to 2017. Hadn't been to a MAC championship game since 2004.
Yeah.
The fans were disappointed every year if they weren't in the MAC championship.
Yeah.
That's whereas Eastern Michigan, hey, we won 5 games this year. Look at us.
Hmm.
We're improving.
Sure.
Bowling
And
Green again this year. We improved.
yeah, and then you look at like Central Michigan, for example. Coach McElwain, he comes from a high profile, background. I think
Hmm.
Central's expectations as fans were probably through the roof. Because
Yeah.
we got this guy who coached at Florida, he's coached at Michigan, he coached at Montana State back, and he's coached all over the country in
Hmm.
big programs. So it's not often you get a guy like him, kind of like a Frank Solich situation where he came from Nebraska, was successful for 16 seasons,
Yeah.
and I think Central's expectations were probably very similar in that regard. And they struggled and then they played well. They've struggled, they've played well. So it's kind of a roller coaster. But nevertheless, their expectations, I'd imagine, are probably some of the highest in the conference,
Hmm.
just based off who their coach is.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously this focuses mostly on football and basketball, kind of the two flagship sports of Mid-American Conference teams. But I think with baseball, you could look at it as well. Ball State and Central Michigan, what are their goals? Make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
What are fan expectations, and what do fans call it a successful season? Oh, well, we're in the NCAA tournament. This is a successful season. 2 years ago, Central Michigan won games in the tournament. Um, I think they won games this last year too, as well, if
Yeah.
I remember correctly. So they've won games in the tournament. They didn't get out of the super regional, but they've won games. Whereas you know Akron, they killed the baseball program, so they're just like, hey, let's just be competitive. We're happy if we're competitive in MAC play.
Hmm.
Bowling Green, same thing. They just revived the program not too long ago.
Yeah.
Let's
It was wild to think about too.
Yeah, so it's just, expectations are different for every program. Softball, same thing. Soccer, there's, obviously Akron is the dominant team in the Mid-American Conference. And I think only a couple of schools sponsor soccer out of the Mid-American Conference. That's why we didn't see like the likes of Toledo playing men's soccer. But
Yeah.
women's soccer, Bowling Green fans, the expectations are compete for the NCAA tournament,
Hmm.
get there. So it's very interesting. Oh, Kent State women's golf. Yes, we're gonna talk about all these. They've won the MAC like the last like 28 years.
Right.
The first year that they don't do that, they're calling for that coach's head.
Sure.
Because why not? This is the bare minimum standard you've set now.
Hmm.
That's the
Yeah.
expectation. That's the fans requirement. Oh, you've got to win the MAC. Like that's the bare minimum.
Right.
So I think it's interesting to see how fans kind of react to that. So I just, big shout out to the folks who replied and commented for us and, gave us something to talk about this week. This is a fun topic. I love these discussions involving listeners, involving fans, involving everybody who chimes in and supports because you guys are why we do this. You guys are why we have these discussions and bring this information out. Let me ask you this real quick, AJ.
Mhm.
If you were an unbiased fan, which we try our best to be. We try our best to be very unbiased on our account, but it's hard sometimes when
Deep's
the
in there,
school we
yeah.
went to is doing successful in
Hmm.
something. So it's we do try to be very good about that. Would you, based off of what you've seen the past couple years, would you deem, let's say Akron, would you deem that this past year was a success or a failure in football?
That's got to be a success because you can look at where you were 2 years ago. You look
Hmm.
at where you were 8 years ago with Jared Pugsley.
Hmm.
He told us the stories from his 4 years. Was it four coaches in 4 years or something like that?
Three coaches in 4 year, 5 years, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, something ridiculous like that. So yeah, I think it's a huge success this year. You look at stability in the program. You look at you get a couple close games here and there, but still,
there are a couple one possession games from I think 5 and 7.
yeah. You they had to play Buffalo that week after, right?
Yeah, that so they lost
The
that Buffalo game.
Yeah.
They lost the Kent State game by a score. They lost the
Yep.
Central Michigan game by a score.
Hmm.
Like they I think, but I agree with you. I think yeah, they're successful, and I think a lot of fans don't look at the other stuff, right? They
Sure.
just look at wins and losses, and that's what you do as fans. Who'd you beat? How many times did you beat other people? And that's how you measure it. Did you win a championship?
Sure.
But I think you've got to look at the other things. Not to sit here and talk about how much we love guys like Coach Candle and Scott Leffler at Bowling Green, but you've got to sit here and you've got to look, well, what are they doing for the program? People are
Hmm.
calling for Todd Kowalczyk's head after they didn't win the men's MAC tournament.
Right.
I think a lot of fans get so wrapped up in where they're at in that moment as a team that they forget what the program was like before that coach stepped in. Todd
Yeah.
Kowalczyk, his first year, they won 4 games, and he is on record as to saying, I don't know how we won four.
Right.
Then Toledo was hit with sanctions from the previous coaching regime that he had to deal with. He had guys who were ineligible halfway through the season because of the previous coaching regime who couldn't force players to go to class. And
Sure. You
so
mentioned
it's
you
a
mentioned
culture
Akron.
change.
Yeah, you mentioned Akron. They lost 4 games by one score last year.
What would their record have been if they'd won all of those?
They only won two.
So they would have been 6-6.
6-6. Yeah.
They would have been bowl eligible.
Yeah.
If you're an Akron fan, you're excited about that. You know what? The
Sure.
previous year, I think they had two one score games that they lost, and they
Hmm.
went what 1-11, 2-10.
Sure. Yeah, they lost to BG by they lost to BG 31-28, lost to Central Michigan 28-21, lost to Kent State 33-27, and lost to Buffalo 20 no, excuse me. Eastern Michigan 34-28.
Hmm.
That's something at media day this year we're going to talk to Coach Moorhead about, how do you get those 4 wins? What do you do to get those 4 wins?
Yep, absolutely. But again, it all comes back to fan expectations. If
Mhm.
you're a fan, try to win them next year.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They've got an opportunity. Let's go look back at the 2021 season, for example. I mean, there's 2 wins, but a lot of blowout wins.
Hmm. Hmm.
60-10, 59-7, 45-10, 38 nothing, 49-14. You know, they beat Bryant and BG in
I don't
2020.
fully count those non-conference games because if you remember that slate, it was what Auburn, Ohio State, and somebody else.
Temple.
Yeah,
They had Auburn, Temple, Bryant, Ohio State.
yeah. So I don't really count the out-of-conference wins because that changes year to year. But you know your conference opponents and you get to know them
Yeah,
very well every year.
right.
But yeah, so I mean, I think understand the expectations as fans. But I promise you, and this is what has always bugged me with how fans start screaming for coaches' heads and everything, and like saying how terrible the program is and blah. I promise you, those players out there gave it their all.
Sure.
They go out and they compete hard. So every time I see people say that, and it's just like, just stop, because most of the people the word fan come derived from the word fanatic. We all know that. That's a common thing. Fanatic, that means you're a little bit crazy but passionate.
Hmm.
If fans really understood the amount of work that went into it, you're it's really hard to tell a 18 to 23-year-old kid to kick a pointy ball through uprights 43 yards away against a crosswind going at 12 miles an hour, and to tell him to kick it straight. Also, there's 11 guys trying to stop you, and it's
Hmm.
a midweek night game where the temperature is 12 degrees.
Sure. And that's one thing too interesting. You kind of bring up, the fan part of that. Now that I'm a high school football official here in Colorado, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and the people who are the ones who complain about referees are the ones who don't know the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that, but like you hear, it's like, oh, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So just a bunch of people who don't know the rules and how what's going on, and that's coaches and players too. Not all of them know not all of them know the rules and how things are played.
And that's
So
perfectly fine. I'm not discredit. We don't want to discredit anybody who is a fan who doesn't know rules very well.
sure,
That's not what we're doing. This is just, there's a lot more nuance to what's going on in the game,
right.
and a lot more that's actually happening behind the scenes than you are aware of.
Hmm.
Because what are these kids at these universities? They're student athletes, student first, athletes second. Now with the NIL, that's of course changing a little bit, but if your school's graduating your players and they're going on to be successful in other things, sure, it'd be great to win a MAC championship, but if they're becoming positive members of society, that's just as good. You
Hmm.
know, I say all that to say, fan expectations are always very fun. Um, and I don't know. I'm already excited for this next football season. We're wrapping up basketball season, as we kind of mentioned. We've got spring sports, lacrosse, softball, baseball, outdoor track, spring soccer that's going on. So I think as we approach these spring sports and get into the fall, my cautionary tale is temper expectations based off of where the program is at the time. Don't
Hmm.
go out and say Akron's going to win the MAC championship and then be disappointed when they don't. Say, all right, Akron has sucked at football the last couple of years, and Coach Moorhead, if you're hearing this, I apologize. Um, Akron has not been good at football the last couple of years, but the goal is go beat Kent State. I mean, they were close this year. They've been close the last few years, except for they lost a blowout 38-0 in 2021 at Akron. But last year they almost beat Kent at their place. Go out, temper those expectations to where the program's at now, because if you don't, you only set yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's about all I have
Yeah,
for
that's it.
this week's show. It's good discussion. Thanks for your thoughts, AJ. Thanks for chiming in on where we were at. But I think it's a worthwhile discussion, and it's always fun to kind of hear from the fans. So again, big shout out to those who follow along on Twitter and commented, gave us your thoughts, gave us your opinions. We didn't name you by name, but if you're listening to this episode, just know that your tweets were read. We did read the responses, and we hear you, and we greatly appreciate you taking the time to drop your ideas and your thoughts on what a successful season looks like for your programs.
Absolutely.
So, AJ, do you have anything on the radar that we need to be aware of with the conference and with the MAC in general?
Well, we should be hearing about Media Day here soon, so that'll be
Mm-hmm.
exciting. I know have been in contact with a few coaches to have them on the show here in the next couple of weeks as basketball season winds up, which will be fun to have, get a conversation, get some recaps on the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think we're going to start digging a little bit deeper into baseball. I mean, the Mid-American Conference baseball has been a lot of fun here early on. A lot of great wins, a lot of close losses.
Mm-hmm.
for some programs, so we'll get deeper into that. And then we've also got our 100th show coming up here in a few weeks, so we're going to recap some of our past conversations with some past guests and kind of have some fun with that.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. Can't believe we're approaching number 100. That's
Yeah,
feels a little unreal
it
to
does. It got
think
here quick.
about. And with that, to add on to that announcement, AJ and I are doing a few things behind the scenes that you guys don't see yet. A couple things that we're trying to make things a little easier for access and create some more dynamic options for you guys as fans and listeners and supporters. Want to give you guys options on other ways to support us. So we're working on a few things. We're going to be launching some of that after we release our 100th episode, just to kind of give us some time to set things up. But yeah, we're really excited for the future. And it's full steam ahead on our end.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys so very much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Make sure you guys continue to check us out on Twitter. We are approaching 2,000 followers. We are at 1785, I believe. So we're almost 1,800 followers on Twitter now. So we'd really love to get to that 2,000 mark here soon. So you guys can check us out on Twitter at College Sport Pod. Follow us over on Instagram at the CSC Podcast. You can check out our website. We're going to be doing a few new things on the website here shortly at www.thecscpodcast.com. Thank you guys so very much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
See you.